I'm going to tell you about the scariest, most difficult day that I've ever had with my obsessive compulsive disorder. Talking about this story is exposure therapy in itself, to be honest. I'm going to set the scene. It's 2017, and I just transferred to the University of New Hampshire. I've been there for about a week or two, and I went home for the weekend to support my mom, who used to be a Patriots cheerleader, and they were doing a reunion performance at Gillette Stadium. My OCD at this point was as bad as it had ever been. I had emotionally contaminated my roommates. I definitely would have come across as like really rude and standoffish, not on purpose, but because I had emotionally contaminated a lot of people. And when I emotionally contaminate someone or something, I have a hard time like even looking in their general direction, let alone speaking to them. At this point, my entire thought process was, if you don't do this, this horrific thing is going to happen. The best way I can explain what it feels like to have OCD is your body reacts to an intrusive thought like you're getting that news or having that option in real life. So to tell somebody with OCD to not react or it's not real, that's like telling somebody to not react when they get bad news in real life. That's how it feels, if that makes sense. Okay, so still setting the scene, the majority of my OCD was surrounded around scrupulosity and feeling like I am an awful person. To this day, I have a bit of a problem and insecurity with that, but I work on it a lot and I don't let it affect how I treat people or how I let people treat me. People with OCD, it's in our core to just feel like we're secretly a horrible human being. It's typically always not the case. But that being said, because of exposure and response prevention therapy, my insecurities don't dictate my life anymore. And I honestly would consider myself pretty confident on a day-to-day basis. But you know, you do get those days where at your core, you just truly believe that you're not a good person, and it's like it's just a little bit of a battle, right? But now it's more of like a whispering, nagging voice instead of an all-consuming, overwhelming belief. I also grew up very Catholic, so the scrupulosity definitely intertwined with religion. So with scrupulosity, unfortunately, I attached my goodness to fearing that if I wasn't a good enough person, I just wasn't gonna get into heaven. Those are pretty high stakes. You know what I mean? So that kind of sets the scene for like what my internal dialogue at the time was. So the morning of that day, I was flooded with those types of thoughts. Whether I was getting out of bed, brushing my teeth, walking up the stairs, then back down, then back up because it didn't feel right. Even when I was eating, my eating disorder was really bad at this time. Everything I did was met with a compulsion. Everything I did basically was a compulsion. I had both. I had mental and physical compulsions. An example of a mental compulsion that I would have done that morning would have been like singing a song while walking through a doorway so no negative thoughts could have come in while I was walking through that door. Or repeating words or moments multiple times in my head. A physical compulsion that I might have done that morning would be like putting on my makeup but it didn't feel right, so taking it off again, putting it back on, didn't feel right, taking it back off again. Oh, I thought a negative thought when the brush touched my skin, therefore I have to take it all off and start again. Another physical compulsion that I 100% did that day was get out of bed, get back in, get out of bed, get back in until I basically started it off on the right foot, or until I had a clean thought when I was touching the floor, and then I could get up and go. Exhausting. So that was basically what my morning would have been until we all got into the car to go to the game. Something I want to preface is when you think a thought enough times, it's bound to happen every once in a while, and that just unfortunately happened in this scenario. I was like, if I see this certain number, I'm never gonna get into heaven, and no matter what I think, no matter what I do, no matter how I act, no matter how I feel later on down the line, if you see this number today, that means that you're just not gonna get in. We parked the car, and I don't want to talk about the number because I don't like putting my triggers on other people, so I'm not going to tell you the number, but it was a sequence of numbers that I was just like fixated on and I was terrified of. And when I got out of the car, I literally saw that number on a license plate. I actually don't even think I've told this story to my parents because I actually get really uncomfortable talking about it and like gonna cry. But I saw that number on a license plate, and I just remember my entire existence just like shattering. Because like once again, like my body reacted like that was truly what was like gonna happen. And so I just kept on thinking, I was like, oh my god, like I'm never gonna see like my family again. Oh my god, like I'm crying. Like I was like, I'm never gonna see my family again. Like no matter what I do, like I'm never gonna be able to cancel this out, because that was like the deal that I had, is if I saw this number, that's what that meant. So yeah, I remember seeing it, and then I remember just having like feeling like my entire world was just like falling apart. And then I went to go into the stands, and I just remember like everything in me was just trying to like compose myself. And I remember just being like overly like, just being probably a bit much. because I was just trying to cancel out my thoughts and trying to ignore it and just trying to do anything in my power to like not think of those things. After the game and after the performance, it was me, my dad, and my sister, and we were walking out, and this was like in a really crowded, it was outside, but it was a pretty crowded area. My dad just was like, "Are you okay?" I physically couldn't compose myself. My dad was the one that actually told me later on that day, he was like, "You just had a panic attack." And I was like, "That wasn't a panic attack." And I literally remember thinking like, I've never had a panic attack. What are you talking about? Like, I remember thinking like, that wasn't even like a huge meltdown, because I was still aware that I was around a bunch of people. Like, I was sobbing and like hyperventilating, but I'm like, that wasn't like a panic attack. Spoiler alert, it was. I had just become so accustomed to having panic attacks every day, multiple times a day for so many years, that I could just like hide from people and could do quietly in the bathroom, like whatever, and that I had no idea that that was a panic attack. It wasn't until I got proper treatment that I realized how warped my view had been on what it actually meant to be mentally well. Because up until that point, I had never been mentally well, is what I realized. Now, that day I look back on as a blessing, because it took me to a whole new level of despair that I just never thought was humanly possible. Like, I didn't know that the human body could get that low. I'm not being dramatic about it. Like, I wouldn't wish that state on literally anybody. It was like I had just snapped from reality, and I was convincing myself I was hearing voices. I would instantly break down and sob after any sort of social interaction. But it led me to leave college and get the help that I needed, because like, thankfully I wasn't able to function. And if I had been, I don't think I would have ever dropped out and gotten the help that I needed. I packed up all my stuff when my roommates weren't there. I did not tell them goodbye, and I drove away. I decided that I needed to go back in, and I popped my tire because I was doing a compulsion in the car. Like, I was doing compulsions in the car where I would like rev the engine, I would swerve the wheel, I would go over a curb on purpose, but this one wasn't going over the curb on purpose. I just felt like I needed to go back into the school to come back out, but I did it too fast because I was trying to leave, because at that point the entire school had been emotionally contaminated for me, but I had gone so fast that I popped the tire. I had to basically sit there while this tire was getting changed, because I can't change a tire. When I got home, I ended up having another panic attack, which led me to be taken to the hospital. I got medicated for the first time. At this time, my mom was moving mountains to get me into this treatment center. Mind you, at this time, it was the only OCD treatment center in the world, bar like one other one. It just so happened to be in Massachusetts where I was. It's a part of the hospital, like it's called McLean Hospital, and I was there for an entire month. But before that, because there was a waiting list, I was doing an outpatient program for about a month as well. That is where I learned the therapy that changed my entire life, which is exposure and response prevention therapy. It's the exact therapy that NOCD offers, with licensed and trained therapists that specialize in OCD and ERP therapy. Being in this hospital, that's when I learned that the years I did in therapy actually made my OCD symptoms worse, because they weren't specialized to obsessive compulsive disorder. I had no idea that just going to a regular therapist could worsen my symptoms. When I was at this hospital, I threw myself into exposure and response prevention therapy. I just had nothing to lose at this point. Like, I felt like I could not get any lower, so there was nothing to lose by giving it my all. I faced my fears over and over and over and over again, pushed my absolute limits. I honestly, like, I couldn't believe how quickly I was seeing results and like feeling relief after doing it. Like, I remember feeling brave for one of the first times like in my life, because I had done an exposure and then I didn't do the compulsion, and I remember nothing bad happening and being educated on the disorder. I just remember being like, I feel so empowered right now. I say this all the time, but I'm gonna say it again. Exposure and response prevention therapy, like, it didn't give me my life back, it just gave me a life. I could barely leave the house without having a panic attack, and now I live in London. I did an entire loop all the way around the world solo, meeting up with friends that I've made along the way. Basically, there was a solid few years there, big chunk of my adolescent life, where I just didn't make a new friend and had like zero social interaction outside of my family, because I was that scared and triggered, and just didn't think anyone would like me. I moved to Dublin in 2019 by myself, survived a pandemic. I was able to leave a really emotionally abusive and physically aggressive relationship. I was able to become even stronger after all of that. Absolutely none of it would have been possible if I didn't do exposure and response prevention therapy. I wouldn't have even been able to finish college, which I did, by the way. Graduated early with honors. I know how scary therapy is. Like, I almost didn't do it. I had to wrap my brain around it before I made the decision. And at the time, I also didn't know anyone that came out the other side. I was literally told by a therapist when I was about to start, you'll never get rid of your OCD. You're just gonna have to learn to live with it. Imagine being told that in your darkest hour. Like, what's the point? But I don't know what took over me in that moment, but I remember being like, okay, then I'm just gonna prove you wrong then, because it's just what I do. And today, I do still have it, but I don't meet any of the requirements to have OCD, like if I was to get tested today. What that therapist should have said is that you can get to a point where you're able to live in harmony with your OCD. You could get to the point where you don't meet medical requirements for the disorder. You can live a life that is actually not controlled by your thoughts and not by OCD. You're gonna be able to feel safe in your own head and in your own body. I used to never feel safe, and I'm gonna cry again. Hold on. I remember an exact moment. I was doing a compulsion in our house, and I remember praying for one moment, even if it was just 1 minute. This is not an exaggeration. I just wanted 1 minute to feel relief and to not have the intrusive thoughts and the intrusive images in my head just for 1 minute. I just wanted to know what that felt like. And right now, I'm actually living a life, an entire life, day after day after day, with a brain better than what I even prayed for. I get to wake up, I get to hang out with friends, I get to make friends, travel, work, and experience just life because I got help. And as long as I keep up with my exposures, I can say that I actually handle my emotions and hardships in general better than the average person or somebody who's actually really never struggled with any sort of mental illness. This is a huge exposure, talking about this literally for the first time ever. I literally have not told, I don't think, one person about this story. I really try to take my own advice. So even though this is a really uncomfortable story to say, I am using it as a way to push myself up that level of ERP therapy, because I haven't done something that's really pushed my boundary in a minute, if I'm being honest. So this is definitely doing that. Exposure and response prevention therapy is the best gift I've ever given myself. And if you are somebody that you know is struggling with OCD, there is hope and there is help. You can literally go to NOCD.com today to start getting effective treatment. Thank you so much for listening to my story.